Let's remember how we just learned to solve an absolute value equation. Remember, we want to take that inside, and if the inside is equal to either the positive or the negative of the number we're equal to, then that is going to give us a solution. So when we look at this first example, 2x plus 5 and the absolute values is equal to 1, we're going to take this inside 2x plus 5 and set it equal to the negative of the number, and take that same 2x plus 5 and set it equal to the positive of the number. Make sure it's the number that you're changing to a plus and a minus and not the equation. It's a little bit more complicated. And now all we have to do is solve this equation the way that we normally would. So getting this by itself, we're going to get x is equal to -3. And over here, we're going to get that x is equal to -2. So notice there are two answers to this problem, but they're not both like one positive and one negative. You're going to get two answers. It's just not always going to be 1 plus 1 minus. Now, the next problem is showing a very, very, very important thing, and that is what was known as the isolation principle. If you have a rule like, here's how you solve a square root problem, here's how you solve an absolute value problem, here's how you solve any kind of problem, you cannot solve that until the thing that you have the rule about is by itself on one side of the equation. So notice here, absolute value by itself on the left, number is on the right. But in our next problem, this absolute value has all kinds of stuff added and multiplied and all kinds of things going on here. There's a lot of things that students want to do here. For instance, they want to distribute the 7. Y'all, absolute values are not parentheses. You cannot distribute into absolute values. It does not work. Okay? It'll work half of the time, and the other half of the time you've just messed everything up severely. So don't do that. Instead, what you're going to want to do is think of this as like its own variable. Like if we had 7y minus 12 is equal to 51, how would I get the y by itself? I would add 12 and I would divide by 7. We're going to isolate the absolute value that way. So again, no distributing. So we're going to add 12 to both sides here. That gives me 7 times the absolute value of x plus 5 is equal to 63. Now we will divide both sides by 7. Do not distribute into absolute values. That is not allowed. It doesn't quite work. So we get the absolute value isolated as x plus 5 and the absolute value is equal to 9. Now that the absolute value is by itself on the left-hand side, now we can apply the rule. What was the rule? Take the inside of the absolute value and set it equal to the negative of that number, and the inside of the absolute value copied exactly equal to the positive of the number it's equal to. Remember, we're changing the plus and minus on the number, not on the equation and not on the 5. So when we subtract 5 from both sides here, we get -14. And when I subtract 5 from both sides here, I get a +4. And there are my two answers. If you don't have two answers, you're doing it wrong. All right, let's try one more of these together. Notice that we are equal to a negative. And so your instinct may be to be like, oh, it does not exist. It's equal to a negative. You cannot say does not exist until you have isolated the absolute values. Rules do not apply until you've isolated the thing that you're talking about. So we need to get this absolute value by itself. How am I going to do that? I'm going to start by adding 32 to both sides. So that gives me -3. Absolute value of 4x plus 6 is equal to -45. And notice what happens when I divide by -3. A negative divided by a negative will become a positive. Remember, you cannot distribute. And in this particular problem, if you distribute that -3 into the parentheses, you will get this wrong. So we're going to have Absolute value of 4x plus 6 is equal to 15. Now, what is our rule for solving absolute values? Where do the two answers come from? So the inside equal to the negative and the inside equal to the positive of the number you're equal to. So 4x plus 6 is equal to negative 15. 4x plus 6 is equal to positive 15. And we will finish by solving each of these. So 4x is equal to negative 21, or x is equal to negative 21 fourths. I didn't say the answers would be pretty, I just said there would be two of them. So over here, subtracting 6, we get 4x is equal to 9. And so x is equal to 9 fourths. And you can see it would be pretty hard to guess and check your way to those two answers. You really need to have the methodology of how to solve these absolute value equations.